fucking piece of shit.
It's the latest in a series of talks the U.S. has had with the Taliban and interested parties here in Doha and in other cities in the region. Last month, 6 days of negotiations here, a framework assessment deal, the Taliban meeting a counterterrorism measure was discussed. The aim of this round was to get the Taliban to sit down with the Afghan government, something so far they have refused to do. Talks expected to continue on Tuesday. For NPR News, I'm Jennifer Glass in Doha. The company of an American businessman arrested and charged with fraud in Russia is Russian President Vladimir Putin to intervene in the case. We have the latest from Charles Maines in Moscow.
For over 2 decades, American businessman Michael Calvi and his investment fund Bering Vostok could do little wrong in the Russian market, raising over $3 billion in capital. A string of luck ended this month, however, when Calvi and 5 associates were arrested and charged with defrauding Russia's Vostochny Bank, a case that shocked Russia's business community. Calvi and the others denied wrongdoing. Now, in an open letter, Bering Vostok is appealing to Russian President Vladimir Putin to take personal control to ensure an independent investigation. Calvi's arrest has highlighted the risks of investing in Russia. The case has also focused attention on the use of lengthy pretrial detentions as a pressure tactic in settling Russian business disputes. If convicted, Calvi faces up to 10 years in prison. For NPR News, I'm Charles Maines in Moscow.
R. Kelly's plea in a Chicago courtroom today to the sexual abuse charges against him is not guilty. The R&B superstar is looking at the possibility of up to 70 years behind bars if he's convicted of all 10 counts of aggravated criminal
Shall infringed
against 4 women, 3 of whom were minors at the time of the alleged crimes. You're listening to NPR News. The president of Mexico is speaking out against racism in his country a day after the Mexican film Roma earned multiple Oscars at the Academy Awards. In his regular press briefing today, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador spoke of racial prejudice and the socioeconomic divide in Mexico. Roma, a semi-autobiographical film, tells the story of an indigenous domestic worker employed by a middle-class family in the 1970s. Filmmaker Alfonso Cuarón won Best Director, and Roma also won Best Foreign Language Film and Cinematography. How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World scorches at the domestic box office with the best opening so far this year. NPR's Trina believes the animated sequel earned an estimated $55.5 million to top the chart over the Academy Awards this weekend. How to Train Your Dragon 3 left the competition in its dust. Wow.
It's a hidden dragon world.
Dragon 3's stellar opening also marks the best debut of the franchise. Last weekend's winner, Alita Battle Angel, finishes in a distant second, followed by previous runner-up The Lego Movie 2, the second part. Fighting with My Family, expanding to more theaters, jumps up to number 4, while Isn't It Romantic drops to 5th. Trina Williams, NPR News. U.S. stocks trading higher with the Dow up 136 points or more than 0.5% at 26,168. S&P is up 0.3%. NASDAQ is also up more than 0.5%. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Noom, offering a personalized weight loss program that uses psychology and small goals to change habits with the goal of losing weight and keeping it off for good. Learn more at Noom, Noom.com.
Comes from TCU. Read on.
The 50,000-foot view of Reina Grande's life so far is pure American dream. She was brought across the border as a child, became the first in her family to graduate from college, earned U.S. citizenship, and launched a career as a critically acclaimed author with fans as notable as Luis Alberto Urrea and Sandra Cisneros. The close-up view of her life is more complicated, and I mean a lot more complicated. But the details of what it took for Grande to get where she is now, surviving childhood abuse, making and then fixing mistakes, and coming to terms with what her family could and could not give her, make her story all the more compelling. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. Ariana Grande's book is her second memoir about her arrival in a foreign country and her discovery of her own voice as a writer. It's called A Dream Called Home. She joins us now to talk about it. Ariana, welcome to Think.
Thank you so much.
So you say that the day that your father decided to immigrate, when you were just 2 years old, 7 years before you came here, that was the day the border changed your life.
Yes, it changed my life because my father went to the other side of that border. And it changed the family dynamic, just the composition of my family and my identity as a little girl, because now I was a little girl without a father, with an absent father. And it affected my relationship with him, I think, until the day he died, some years ago. I feel that we never recovered from that separation and from the way the war came to change our relationship.
So you were living in a town called Iguala when you were a little girl. Can you talk about the kind of place it was and what made your parents ultimately both decide that they needed to leave there?
Yeah, Iguala is in the state of Guerrero. It's the second poorest state in Mexico. 70% of the population in that state lives in poverty. And Iguala nowadays, it's infamous for the disappearance of 43 students 4 years ago. It's a very unstable place. There are a lot of cartels in the area, especially because Guerrero supplies 50% of the heroin to the U.S. So my hometown is surrounded by poppy fields, and the local bus station serves as a distribution center for the cartel. But back when I was growing up there, we didn't necessarily have those problems that we have now in Iguala, but we did have that poverty, and it was that extreme poverty that led my father to make that difficult choice to leave his family and come here to look for work.
So your mother followed a few years later, and you were left in the care of your paternal grandmother. Parents were sending her money, and she just barely fed you guys.
Yes. Yeah, I tend to call her my evil grandmother because her name was Evila, which is spelled like the word evil with an A. And it was funny because when I was learning English and I came upon the word evil, I said, that kind of looks like my grandmother's name. And then I looked up the definition in the dictionary and I said, yeah, that's my grandmother's name. She was very resentful of having to take care of me and my siblings. She was 69 years old and she really was not in a condition to take on more children to take care of, since she was already taking care of my cousin, whose mother had also come here. But it was a difficult moment for us because I think that the trauma of being separated from our parents was worse because we were left behind with my grandmother, who did not care for us and did not love us and give us that emotional support that we needed at that particular moment in our childhoods when we felt abandoned and unloved by our parents.
So your father came back at one point and was going to take your older brother and sister and leave you behind.
Yeah, that was really tough for me because the only reason why I survived my childhood the way I did was because my older sister took care of me. She literally took on the role of the mother, and she protected me and she looked out for me, and I grew to depend on her. And when my father came back, he said he was going to take my sister with him. I felt so devastated because I was going to have to stay alone without my sister. And I just couldn't bear the thought of losing another important person in my life. And I begged my father to not leave me. And I begged him until he finally changed his mind and decided to bring me along as well.
How did you get across the border?
With the smuggler. My father took us to Tijuana, and he went out to look for a smuggler, and then he guided us across the border. and it was very difficult because we had to run a lot and walk a lot, and I was 9.5 years old at the time. And one of the reasons my father didn't want to bring me was because he said I was too small, and he worried that I didn't have enough strength in me to make it. And
We should say that today you're 5 feet tall as a grown woman.
yes, yeah, let's say that, huh? Yeah, I am 5 feet tall, and that's it. And as a little girl, yes, I was a very little girl, and my father ended up having to carry me on his back when we were trying to cross. And I feel bad because we got caught, 2 times we got caught by border patrol, and I felt guilty that I thought it was my fault. And I was afraid that my father was regretting bringing me. So on our third attempt, we tried it at night when it was pitch black at the border, and we couldn't see anything. But that was when we finally got across.
So your mother, before your father brought you and your siblings, your mother had gone across the border as well, gone north to be with him, but their marriage didn't survive.
No, it didn't survive, and it took me a long time, and that was one of the realizations for me when I was writing the book, was to try to understand my mother's motives, because for a long time I was angry at her, more than I was at my father. It was my mother that I resented for leaving me, because I think, in society we always have higher expectations of the mother in regards to the children. So I always felt betrayed by my mother for leaving me, for going to my father's side. Because one of the things she said was, my husband needs me, and that's why she was going with him. And I would think, what about your children? We need you too. So I had a lot of resentment towards my mother, and when I was writing the book, it really helped me to understand that she wasn't just my mother, she was also my wife. And I understand that, that sometimes you could have conflicting desires when you're a mother and when you're a wife. And she really wanted to be with my dad. And she had a fear that, like a lot of men who come here, that he would meet someone else and leave her.
Which
So
ultimately is
yes, which she was not able to keep that from happening, even though she came here to be with him and do what he told her to do, and he ended up leaving her for someone else. And that really impacted our relationship with her, because we never had the same relationship. She was very angry and resentful. And then she, instead of being a mother to us, she focused more on like trying to find another partner and to heal her broken heart and I guess her pride too, right?
But ultimately she left you twice.
Yeah. More than, I want to say more than that, because there's the physical abandonment, but then there's also the emotional abandonment too. Yeah.
What's really interesting is there's a point in the book where you and her mother, your maternal grandmother, had a very kind of uncomplicated relationship, and you knew her as this very kind figure and very supportive figure. And your mother told you some things about their relationship that took you by surprise and didn't reflect the relationship you had with your grandmother. What I think is so fascinating, Trina, is that you don't seem as if you ever thought your mom was lying. That you somehow knew that she was telling you the truth.
Well, yes, because I was just trying to figure out, like, what would be the motive for my mother to make that up. And the way she told me the story, and she's told me several times, so it wasn't just the one time. After that, she would tell me more. The way she said it, I had no doubt about what she was saying. I found it hard to believe, and I didn't want to believe it, but I just couldn't understand, like, why would she make something up like that? And then I talked to her sister, to my aunt, and my aunt also told me the same thing about my grandma being very wrong as a mom. So I had to learn how to deal with these two images of my grandma, because my grandma history of violence in my family affect the way I parent my own kids. And I have to say that because I'm so afraid of conflict and disciplining, I tend to go the other way, the other extreme, than my parents, where I am too much of a pushover. My kids, they know that I might yell once in a while, but they know that it's not gonna go much further than that. And I try to get them to. I told my children, like they've read my work, they know about my upbringing, they know what I went through, and I think they understand. But yeah, it's tough because I didn't grow up with timeouts. I'm gonna take away your favorite toy kind of thing. I mean, my parents were more disciplining was I'm gonna take off my shoe and beat you with it, or take off my belt, and so it's been tough to not do that with my kids, but I haven't done it, and I'm really glad about that because I feel that we need to learn how to break those bad cycles in our families, and once you manage to break it, then things are different for the next generation.
I can't imagine there's any greater tool for sort of putting into context the experiences you've had and how they've affected you than writing your own story.
Yeah, well, it's been very cathartic actually to be able to write a story, to think about my parents' story and my grandparents' story, and to look at the inheritance, in the family, the legacy that we leave behind, and then the choices that we can make. And I feel that, in regards to, for example, the violences we're talking about, that my father chose to replicate that and to be that kind of parent, versus I tried to go the other way. So it's been really interesting for me to see how much we are influenced by our families and by traditions and by memory, but also how we as human beings have the choice to do what we're supposed to do.
We're speaking this hour with author Reina Grande. Her new memoir is called A Dream Called Home. If you'd like to join us, you can call 1-800-933-5372. You're listening to Think. I'm Chris Boyd, speaking this hour with writer Reina Grande. Her new memoir is called A Dream Called Home. If you'd like to join us, you can call 800-933-5372, or you can find us on Twitter at KERA Think. So you move around in time throughout the book, but you open at this moment when you're starting college at UC Santa Cruz, you're home for the first time, and it should represent like this triumphant moment, right? You've done really well in school, you've gotten into this good university, but like getting in did not mean fitting in for you, at least initially. Will you talk about that adjustment?
Yeah, well, that's a good way to put it. That just because I got in, didn't mean that I fit in when I got there. It was a very challenging time for me because I grew up in LA, where it's very diverse, and the schools I went to were mostly Latino, so I never felt like a minority in LA. And then when I went to UC Santa Cruz, only about 13% of the student body was Latino, and they were not in the creative writing program where I was. So I hardly ever saw any Latino students around me, and I felt that culture shock, being a minority student, being surrounded by mostly white students. And in the creative writing program, it was really challenging because I was writing about things that the students and my professors were having a hard time understanding. The experiences with immigration, with poverty, with family separation, all these things. So that was really hard, of trying to find my way and trying to feel that I belong there, that to be there. But it took a while, and I had a really beautiful moment during a protest on campus, which was my very first protest, and we were protesting Prop 209 in affirmative action, and that was the first time when I saw the Latino students. So it was beautiful to know that there they were, and that I had found my community, and little by little I managed to find my way, and to also realize that just because there's not a community around me that I belong to, like I realized that sometimes you have to create that community. You can't expect it to be there waiting for you with open arms. You have to learn how to create a community for yourself.
So outraged on your behalf when you write about one of your writing professors basically praising all these stories about, like, I guess your white classmates writing about their boyfriends and their girlfriends and whatever, and you're writing, right,
drinking,
and you were told that you stories.
Yeah, that was really hard for me when I would hear comments from my teacher about my writing being melodramatic, overwritten, those kinds of things. But now I'm actually grateful for some of those experiences, because they taught me the reality of the publishing industry, which is, it's really tough. You get a lot of rejections, and those experiences in school, like being rejected constantly, helped me to learn how to fight for my stories, and how to keep writing my truth, no matter what anybody said about how I was doing it. And that trained me for the real world when I was trying to make a career as a writer, was learn how to deal with these rejections and know that I needed to hold on to my stories and to keep telling my truth, sharing my reality.
You also write about an experience here that I think may be common to a lot of people who immigrate to this country, especially if they immigrate from life of poverty, which is Spanish was your first language. You had this challenge to learn English when you got here, and then you discovered that your Spanish wasn't like textbook Spanish, and it wasn't like the proper Spanish, and you were sort of confronted with the need to learn your own language, your mother tongue, all over again.
Yeah, that was very difficult, because when I came to the U.S., my elementary school that I attended didn't have resources for immigrant children like me. They didn't have bilingual education. They didn't have ESL classes.
So you were just dropped into an English.
Yeah, I was just dropped into an English-only classroom. And my teacher, when she saw that I didn't speak English, she just put me in a corner and ignored me the rest of the year. And little by little, I tried to learn English. And then in my junior high, I was put in ESL classes. But the was not to make me biliterate. It was to make me English dominant. And I experienced something that now I know the word for. It's subtractive bilingualism, which is when you replace your mother tongue with English. And I didn't know that was a word. There was a word for what happened to me, but now I do. And it impacted me so much that to this day I don't write in Spanish. And it impacted my relationship with my mother, because when I was shamed about my Spanish, being made to feel ashamed of my Spanish, that kind of led me to then be ashamed of my mother, who never learned English. And then it also impacted me now with the fact that I didn't even teach my children Spanish because of that trauma. So I lost a lot of my Spanish. It was replaced by English. And then when I got to college, to UCSC, I discovered they had a class called Spanish for Spanish speakers. And I felt like, oh, here's my chance, to reclaim my mother tongue. And I signed up for the class. And it was very traumatic to learn that my Spanish was such a mess. And my teacher said to me that my immigrant experiences have made me twice the person I used to be. And she said, now you're bilingual, you're bicultural, you're binational. You're not less, you are more. And that really helped me to start reframing my thinking in terms of who I was, and not letting myself think that I wasn't enough, and to understand that maybe I was more than enough.
Your memoirs, at least, and maybe and read, someone else is doing those translations?
Well, okay. Well, that's a little complicated because I wanted to reclaim my mother tongue in my writing. I asked my editor if I could do my own translation. And originally they allow me to do that. So I translated The Distance Between Us, my first memoir. I translated it myself into Spanish, but there were a lot of mistakes in it because of the way I speak Spanish. There were a lot of mistakes in it, and little by little, like after the book came out, once in a while I would get an email from a reader who would say, oh, you made this mistake and that mistake, and here are the page numbers.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I know. That's like, well, and sometimes I would usually ignore those emails, but then I got an email from a writer that I really admire, and she pointed out that there were mistakes in my translation, and I feel so embarrassed, so humiliated by it, that then when A Dream Called Home was gonna come out, my editor said, about the translation, she said, how about we hire a professional translator to do it? And because I felt so insecure, I said, yeah, just hire someone. I wanted to do it, but I knew my limitations, and I didn't want to get any more embarrassing emails. So we hired someone, and a few months later I got the translation back from the translator, and I had such a difficult time holding that manuscript in my hands and feeling that it was mine. It didn't.
It wasn't your voice in Spanish?
No, it wasn't my voice anymore. The translator had used fancy Spanish words that I had to keep picking up the dictionary to find the meaning, because I couldn't read it without having to pick up a dictionary and look up those words. And then I started to feel the loss, this immense loss of my native tongue. And then I started to think about how maybe if I had stayed in Mexico, those words would be mine. And I picture myself going to college in Mexico and knowing all those fancy words and being able to use them in my writing. And anyway, and then I had to snap out of it and give myself a reality check. And then I told myself, if you would have been pulled out of school and put to work at a young age. So even better. But I did ask my editor about reading, because I said, this sounds nothing like me,
Mhm.
you know. And more than having a perfect translation, I wanted it to sound like me.
Yeah.
So I went and I spent about 200 hours editing that translation and putting in the words that I knew. And so that's what happened with that book, and now it came out. It's okay. I can live with that.
This is think. I'm away.
Yeah, well, I think as an immigrant, when you're displaced from your home, it's very difficult, you know, to be in this country and trying to find a place to belong, to try to make this your home, and you know, there's so much discrimination here that makes it very hard for an immigrant, especially an immigrant of color, to feel at home. So I felt this emotional homelessness for a long time. And when I was in college, I found the work of Gloria Anzaldo about being a turtle. And she said, I am a turtle. Wherever I go, I carry home on my back. The only things I'm at my disposal at the time were just my words and my dreams. And that's how I learned to build a home for myself, using those materials. And I learned to find home in my writing, and I feel that now I have managed to build a home that I can carry because I carry my writing and my books with me, and those are that's my home right there. That's where I belong.
So when you first finished college, you wanted to write, but you needed to, you know, put food on the table and a roof over your head, so you became a teacher, which was not your dream. Talk, first of all, for people who don't speak any Spanish, can you explain what your name means, your first and last name?
Reina Grande. Reina means queen and Grande means big. So I am the big queen, but I'm only 5 feet tall, as we said. So I am the little big queen.
So your students, you had to learn how to command their respect, despite the fact that some of them were bigger than you were.
Yes, it's very hard to command respect when your students are older than you. I had a hard time because when I started teaching, I was teaching at a school, and I didn't study to be a teacher. I didn't take a second education class. But I was creating
really good, like Dr. Carl Walker, who uses data mapping and open source software to help organizations serve at-risk communities. Easy do, read on.
You're listening to Think. I'm Chris Boyd, speaking this hour with Raina Grande about her new memoir, A Dream Called Home. If you'd like to join our conversation, call in to 1-800-933-53. So you mentioned early in the hour that you really felt like your older sister might have helped to raise you as a kid and take care of you, and then you turned around and wanted to look after, we read it, and we tend to look out for each other, especially the older siblings, not the younger siblings, and my older sister did that to, I think she went overboard, because she sacrificed so much to take care of me, and then it was my turn as an older sister to take care of my younger sister when she started to do what teenagers do, which is to do crazy stuff and lose their way. And so when I was at the university, my mother sent my younger sister to Mexico as punishment for all the bad stuff she was doing. And I went to Mexico, and of course she was doing bad stuff over there too. So then I decided to bring her back to live with me, and I got to smuggle her into my dorm on campus and take care of her. It was challenging. Major in my hands. I was 21 years old, trying to take care of myself and trying to be a student. And now I was also taking care of my teenage sister. But I felt that I needed to pay it forward. My older sister had done what she had done for me. So I had to take care of my younger sister. I wanted also to give us a home. I was lonely, and my sister had no one also, so I wanted to give us a home. And that was my motivation, to make sure that we had a home, that she had support, that I wanted to make sure that she found her way back. And abusive, he was a drinker. You discovered, I guess you found yourself as a writer in a really dark time in your life. Oh, because of my father's alcoholism. Yeah, that was really, really sad for me, because when we were in Mexico, when my father was here, my siblings and I used to idolize him. He was an absent father, and we used to have this visions of him, our hero, and he was going to come back and rescue us from our miserable childhoods, and so we idolized him. And then when we came to live in Los Angeles, that was one of the most heartbreaking realizations recently, that the father that I had fantasized about was when I came to live with. And my father had a lot of good qualities, he really did. He was a big dreamer, and he had very high expectations of us, which I appreciate to this day. He was the one who said, get an education.
Yeah, he was the one who said, I brought you here to get an education. He expected perfect grades from us, and he was a dictator, in the home, but he would not tolerate anything